Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. My guest today at MLTV Mainline is Bill White, Township Manager for Radnor Township. The subject is microcells, a word with which many residents may not be familiar, but you'll be hearing more about microcells as they continue to pop up around the township and the region, in most cases without much notice. Bill, I appreciate your being with us today to talk about microcells, what they are, why we need them, the connection with 5G, and why there's been some debate on occasion about the number and placement of microcells throughout the township, and the extent to which Radnor Township, and in fact any property owner in Radnor, can influence whether and where microcells are placed. So let's begin with, what is a microcell and what is the connection with 5G?
So first of all, thank you for having me. The microcells, as the name would indicate, are a smaller sized cell tower that is placed at the top of usually an existing telephone pole. There's usually a metal box or some sort of encasement on the pole, or maybe at the base of the pole, that houses all the mechanicals. And then at the top of the tower is a cell node that is what transmits the signal between the different towers. And then in terms of its relationship with 5G, that I'm not sure how many of the micro towers in Radnor are carrying 5G, but that technology is rolling out. The different cell carriers are rolling it out, and we can get into some of the more details, but the metaphor that was explained to me that helped visualize it is, 5G is, adding a couple more lanes to the superhighway. So if you've got a 2-lane highway now and it's jammed up full of cars, you add 5 more lanes to that. Now it's a 7-lane highway, and for a period of time the cars move faster, and and that's really what 5G is meant to do, is to add a couple extra lanes for the increased cell traffic that we're all using.
Yes, especially these days with COVID and so on.
Absolutely.
Tell us about Pennsylvania law, House Bill number 2564, Small Wireless Facilities Development Act, that requires communities to update their infrastructure to accommodate this new technology that's coming along faster, wireless, et cetera, and gives service providers the right of way to install equipment in the township and in fact throughout the state.
Yeah, so and I appreciate this conversation because it alerted me to the House bill. Not something that typically comes out from the State House, where they notify us of these things. So I appreciate the chance to do some research. And that House bill looks like what they're trying to do is get out ahead of rolling out this new technology, the 5G technology, or addressing cell coverage in areas that are currently lacking in coverage, and also the folks don't want to consider the tall 250-foot traditional type of towers. So what House Bill 2564 seems to be doing is making a uniform law at the state level that municipalities would have to comply with in most cases. So what they're trying to do is make it a little bit more uniform on the cell carrier side, and kind of restrict municipalities to a certain extent on our ability to limit both in terms of number, quantity, height, some of those specifics as these come out. Now, otherwise, what could happen is you could have a carrier coming into, we'll say Radnor, for example, and maybe we have a 250-foot, that's a bit extreme. So let's say 50-foot, a 50-foot height requirement, and then they go to a neighboring township who has a 75-foot requirement. And now you've got the two very different heights, and it might cause some trouble in getting some continuity with the signal. So the state, I think, is trying to make it a little bit more streamlined and uniform across boundaries.
But help me understand something. There is a federal mandate, is that correct? And it leaves to the states, as in our case, with the state law, leaves to the states how that federal mandate will be implemented. Is that correct?
It could be. I apologize. I'm not sure where the connection between federal and state is at, but in similar type of situations, absent some state law, it is left to the municipalities to regulate these types of things. So the FCC at the federal level does control
Yes.
the cell technology, the safety standards, the RF emissions, the heights, all of the limitations the carriers have to comply with, where the municipalities and where the state is trying to make it a more uniform, is allowing these cell carriers to install these sites a little bit more on a uniform basis in terms of height, in the right of way, existing poles, adding poles, those types of really specific details that the federal government's not gonna get involved in.
Which of course makes sense, eminently good sense. What's the difference between a microcell and a macro cell? The macro cell are the tall towers that we've all seen, and most of them are ugly, and some of them are ridiculously camouflaged to look like trees.
Yeah, well, that's the difference. So the macro tower is typically much higher. They're the towers that we're used to seeing. There are some pretty funny looking camouflage ones out there. There are also some that are magnificently camouflaged, and you would not know it's a cell tower if someone didn't point it out and say, hey, that's a cell tower. I'm reminded there's several along the Pennsylvania Turnpike that are either farm silos. They look like a regular silo that you would see on a farm, but it's just a little skinnier, and it's really just a cell tower. And then there are also others that are flagpoles that look like really thick flagpoles, but they're in fact cell towers. And then, as you pointed out, there are some that look like the wire brushes that are just that do stick out more than they blend in.
Yeah.
So those are the micro towers. They're intended to they're the main highway for the data, as I understand it. So those are the interstates. If we're going back to our car metaphor, those represent the interstate infrastructure, and then the microcells, these ones that exist on top of the utility poles here locally and throughout the country.
Yes.
Those represent the tertiary roads that come off of the major highway. Those are the roads that get us back into our neighborhoods and provide a little bit greater cell coverage through the hills and down in the valleys and some of the areas where it's hard for these tall towers to cover.
Mm-hmm. Has Radnor Township approved many macro towers? I know there were some at the municipal building for obvious reasons, emergency and so on. But I don't know so many macro towers in the township.
Yeah, the only existing one now is the one next to the municipal building. And in fact, the township doesn't own that. We own the land that it sits on. It was constructed and managed by a private company. There have been discussions through the years about adding macro towers in various locations. There just hasn't been an appetite, either politically or from the residents, to install those.
I know there's been some discussion, maybe controversy, about putting a macro in the Willows Park because it is in a low level and there's no service there at all, particularly in the event of an emergency.
And that was definitely one of the locations. And again, for political and just other reasons, the neighbors it wasn't something that was able to gain a lot of traction, and it doesn't appear that it is going to.
But a micro tower isn't the solution to the problem in the Willows Park, is it? We're going to have to come up with another solution to there.
Well, my understanding is that the only way the micro towers become a solution is when you're able to string enough together to carry the signal all the way through the property. And that's where it becomes difficult. Not a lot of poles, first of all, to hang them on. So there would be an installation of poles. And it's the same discussions that you have with the macro towers. There's the issue of aesthetics, cluttering a site with those. Clutter to some, and then also these do emit radio waves, and there are some that are concerned that an increase in radio waves could be dangerous.
Who is authorized to erect micro towers in the township?
So as it stands right now,
and who decides where they will be placed?
Sure. As it stands right now, the township does have an agreement with Crown Castle. That agreement has been in place for 15 plus years. They have a majority of the micro sites or micro towers that are here in Radnor. There are a couple others that have gone up. Again, as we talked about, the FCC, there are federal laws that allow for these towers to go up. And so the township really has limited control over, going to your next question in terms of the location or the frequency that we see these. We're limited significantly in how we control the deployment. At the end of the day, what the ultimate goal is for the carriers is to get a greater signal through the entirety of an area. So in our case, these are going up in places where they need to get signals to.
Is Crown Castle the only one that has a relationship, or do they have an exclusive with Radnor Township?
They're the only one that has an exclusive with Radnor Township. The House Bill 2564 that we referred to earlier could open the door for additional carriers to come in.
But again, I'm trying to understand this. Crown does not decide whether a pole will go anywhere, as I understand it. It's the carrier who contacts Crown, says, we want to put a signal in there, we want a better signal, we want 5G. And so we think we want 3 poles, so I'm making this up.
Sure.
We want you to go in, do an engineering study, decide how many poles, where they should be placed, and AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, any one of the carriers then decides they want their signal on that pole. Is that, in a very simplistic way, the way it works?
Yeah, that's how I understand it as well. And when you break it down in terms of a business transaction, it makes sense, because at the end of the day, those carriers, they're the ones paying for the micro tower. They're paying rent, or however they term it in their world, but we'll call it rent. So they're paying rent for that micro tower to send out their signal. Right. So in this case, Crown Castle would install that, and at the end of the day, it's the carriers that are paying for it.
But who's responsible for the maintenance and repair of the poles? Who's responsible for upgrading the technology?
Yeah, so that's
or Crown.
Yeah, so in terms of the physical infrastructure, the nodes, the mechanical boxes that I described earlier, those are the responsibility of, say, Crown Castle, the owner of the micro cell. In terms of rolling out the technology, that's a partnership and agreement that exists between the carriers and the micro cell company.
Okay. In discussions with some folks, I've heard people say, well, who's responsible for that? And when are we going to hear from the township? When is the township going to decide that there will be microcells or not? Again, from what I'm hearing here, it's not the township's decision. It's Crown who gets an order, comes to the township and says, we have an order. As long as they're able to comply with the engineering specs and whatever other codes Radnor Township may have, Crown has the right of way to go into a neighborhood or an area and place whatever number of poles they think are necessary. Is that correct?
So a couple of things. And first of all, generally speaking, yes, that is one method to get micro towers installed. Not dissimilar from, say, a rural area installing sewer lines. The township, we could do a study and identify areas of weak coverage, and we could go to those neighbors and recommend, say, hey, we think that it would be a good idea for you to put some here. If the neighbors agree, then we can advocate on behalf of those neighbors, or the neighbors could come to the township and advocate for themselves, and we could be the intermediary to get those the infrastructure installed. So it can go one of many different ways. Ultimately, the the profit motive of the major carriers, they're going to be the ones looking at this on a more regular basis. So they're going to be the ones pushing the network. And then on the flip side, the users, the residents in areas where there is a weak signal, if they're at their home and they need a stronger signal, they have a desire and a need to push for greater coverage or greater coverage as well. So those are the two primary ways that these would come up. It's been roughly a decade since the last cell tower, micro tower went up. So it's not a conversation we're having on a frequent basis, but as we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, is that with new technology rolling out, the greater demand for cell, it is something that I think everyone anticipates this being a greater or more of these conversations taking place. And the last thing I want to touch on with that, because you mentioned, the ultimate decision to put these up is that there are very strict federal guidelines that these micro towers have to comply with in terms of emissions, radio emissions, height, and safety requirements. So they are installing these having complied with or having to comply with these federal regulations. So it can't be a situation where they put them up every 20 feet and no one has any control on it.
Well, as we said before, there are different types of microcells. They're the type where it sits on the top of an existing utility pole, like this one that sits on Lancaster Avenue, I think. That's quite common. But as they move into residential areas, Crown and others, I suppose, are making an effort to come up with designs that are more compatible, that are more acceptable, less objectionable. And so we see examples of the integration of the pole or the microcell with a street light in some areas. And Crown has shown me and others examples of some of the poles they put up in other regions. And if you have to have one of them, they don't look too bad. In fact, they look very nice, some of the designs with lamps and so on. Furthermore, again, as I understand it, they continue to work on the technology so that they, instead of the pole and a separate box with all of the electronics, they're now integrating all of the electronics in the base of the pole. So there's a single unit instead of two separate units. A lot of words to say that they seem, Crown and others, seem to be making a concerted effort to accommodate the wishes of people who have to have them in their communities to fit in with the community. And I absolutely agree with all of that. And we've seen some of the renderings. And in fact, we've probably been in downtown areas and urban areas, and we've walked past these micro cell towers that are lining the streets there, and we've had no idea because to your point, they look like street lights. They look like, just regular poles that may just have a banner hanging on the side of it that says "Welcome to my town," and really inside of it is a cell tower. So I think they're appealing to the need or the requests of the homeowners in the areas that a traditional looking tower is just not all that attractive. So nonetheless, there may still be some communities that just don't want microcells in their community. I don't want one sitting at the top of my driveway. What happens then?
Yeah, so we're learning that as we go. So it's an excellent point, and there are definitely, like anything, there are some that have a greater concern with the amount of radio waves and RF waves that are these towers emit, and any kind of safety concerns. So, like I said, the federal government monitors, and they have strict requirements of these companies to constantly monitor their sites and test them either on site or they have constant remote monitoring, so that they always know what the emissions of the sites are. But that being said, not everyone is excited, or they have the mentality of not in my front yard. And so that's where it gets tricky because laws like the House bill and like the federal law give these companies access to the rights of way to install them. So there's limited recourse from the township side to prohibit or restrict installation. So what municipalities have done is they've entered in agreements like we have with Crown Castle to try to make it a little bit more of a collaborative approach.
Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? Collaborative?
Well, so that the municipality and through our elected of folks who represent ultimately the homeowners have a voice on the location and frequency and height and some of what they look like, what we were talking about a moment ago.
Yes.
So that's where those kind of arrangements can be beneficial.
Does a homeowner have to pay extra once a pole comes into the neighborhood for 5G or to accommodate 5G?
No, there's no obligation on the homeowner side other than giving up or allowing a pole if it doesn't exist already to be installed within the right of way. But that authority exists already. Are
homeowners notified in advance if a decision has been made to place a pole in a certain location? All the engineering has been done and so on?
Yeah, so in a perfect world or in an environment that we're trying to create at the township building now, if there are micro towers to be installed, yes, and we would ideally be notified in advance and could let the neighbors know. I'm not sure it's always worked that way, but again, it's been a while since one's been installed, and we're kind of learning about some of them after the fact. So it's a relationship, an ongoing relationship that we're trying to get on top of.
I didn't realize that it's been 10 years since the last microcell. Is that right?
Yeah, it's my understanding. In working with our codes department, getting some of the dates and the locations. And to that point, one of the things we started working on within the last couple of weeks is we're trying to get a complete inventory of all of the poles and any micro cell towers that are attached to them. We're trying to get a township-wide inventory completed so that we can, on a moment's notice, be able to report and identify where these are at exactly.
Can you give us an approximation of how many microcells have been installed in Radnor?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the 20 range, maybe a couple below 20.
Yeah, as I said, for the most part, they're inconspicuous. They have to be pointed out to you because it's not line of sight. They sit high, and usually the boxes that sit on the pole are high as well. So yeah, it's not something that pops out at you.
The one thing that I've learned recently, and it's not something you would immediately think about, but the topography of Radnor is we do have some hilly areas. And so at street level, one of those micro towers could go up and if you're at street level, you'd never see it. But 50 feet away is a big steep slope with a house on it, and they're looking out their bedroom window right at it. So those are the kind of things that come up and why some people would oppose having a tower nearby and or the look of them.
The folks who are interested in learning more about microcells and whatever plans there may be to put microcells in their neighborhood, whom do they contact?
Well, they can always contact the township with regard to finding out if there are plans for installations, or if they would like to consider adding or getting some installed, they can reach out to the township. As we talked about, we have an agreement with Crown Castle. We can help get that conversation going. In terms of just understanding what they are and educating themselves, the FCC and doing some good old-fashioned internet homework. There's a ton of information out there on it.
Yes, I learned. What little I know, I learned on the internet, and thank God my grandson taught me how to use that.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to be able to reach out to Crown Castle and talk to them directly, which is a huge help.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the information. As I said, I expect that we hear a lot about 5G. They're starting to really promote 5G, all of the carriers. From the township standpoint, Are you excited about the advent of 5G? Does it improve our emergency communications? For example, public safety?
So, yeah, I'm always excited about the advancement of technology as long as it's done safely. So, as long as they're rolling out this 5G technology in a safe manner, then yeah, because fewer and fewer people have home phones that are connected to actual landlines.
Yeah.
Having 5G, again, it goes back to our superhighway analogy. It just means that when you call 911, you're gonna get a line and you're gonna get through. And the other improvement is that with the micro towers, the cell signal can triangulate quicker, so the safety services can identify your location a little bit faster through having additional towers or connection points out there. Other than that, you're describing to the dispatcher where you're at, and our guys and gals are responding accordingly.
Bill, I'm really impressed. You sound like a techie.
Just enough to be dangerous. No, but we've had a lot of conversations through the years about cell towers, and I know the Willows area was a point of contention for a number of years, and I was involved in a lot of those meetings with our safety forces, and it is a concern. A lot of people, hiking on trails and biking back there, you got to have some sort of coverage if you need to dial 911. So that's where that technology and having the capability to connect becomes important.
Yeah. Well, I know I've talked to Jake Abel about the Willows in particular, because he has had a special interest in it as the commissioner for the ward. And as I understand it, no one has come up with a solution yet to satisfy the need for emergency communication in the Willows, in the park.
Yeah, the Willows in the Skunk Hollow Park, that's correct.
Yeah. And is that because there is no technology, or because we just don't know about it yet?
Well, the technology as we understand it today are these micro towers, and there just hasn't been an appetite for a mass installation to solve the problem.
Okay, well, I hope there isn't an incident of one type or other that would drive the decision.
Amen.
Bill, thank you very, very much. My guest today has been Bill White, the Township Manager for Radnor Township. The subject has been microcells. You'll be seeing and hearing more about them in the years ahead. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves.